The African Union is suddenly making an intense effort to bring Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger back into the organization. And this is happening only months after Captain Ibrahim openly embarrassed the Union by delivering a blunt and uncomfortable truth. You always hear about the African Union, he said. Yes, it exists. But what real impact does it have in practice? This is the institution that is supposed to unite us and build genuine integration across Africa. Yet wars continue across the continent, taking the lives of millions of young Africans, and an organization made up of heads of state who command national armies still cannot organize itself to effectively support certain countries. Union should not just be a word. Union should be a symbol. Now, the AU is confronting the possibility of losing Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, three militarily hardened nations that walked out and dismissed the Union's suspensions as meaningless. Suddenly, the tone changed. The Union is scrambling. AU Commission Chair Mahmoud Ali Yusuf and the leadership have now begun talking about pragmatic reintegration. They say the Sahel countries need the support of the entire African Union. And the irony is striking. The same institution that failed to shield Africans from terrorism, foreign exploitation, or repeated coups now urgently wants these Sahel governments back at the table. This does not look like reconciliation. It looks like retreat dressed in diplomatic language. The AU moved first. So what are they actually saying about this reversal? They begin by addressing stabilization in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. They say they have hope because the two sides are willing to sit down and talk. There is tension between Rwanda and the DRC, and even inside Congo, armed groups remain active. Their first objective, they explain, is peace between Rwanda and the DRC. They point to the Washington Agreement, which established a ceasefire intended to bring factions together. Yet even now, they admit there is still no real trust between the parties. However, both sides signed the agreement, so they are obligated to implement it. Mediators must therefore assist the parties in enforcing the deal, and mechanisms must exist to ensure implementation. A ceasefire alone is not enough. It must be carried out in practice. That includes withdrawal of forces, including foreign troops returning to their countries, and guarantees that neither side returns to open conflict. Civilians must be protected. The ceasefire also requires demobilization, disarmament, and a security process that guarantees safety for citizens once fighters leave the battlefield. All of this, they say, is contained within the Washington Agreement. Inside Congo, internal dialogue is also necessary. The Congolese people must come together around the table. They note that President Felix Tshisekedi intends to launch an internal dialogue process to restore stability. The African Union, they say, will accompany and support this peace process. They add that a mediation mechanism has been established under regional leadership, supported by former presidents tasked with addressing both the internal situation in DRC and relations with Rwanda. Field missions have already taken place, including meetings with neighboring states. The AU emphasizes that African problems should be solved by Africans rather than left entirely to external partners. The Washington Agreement and the Doha Declaration were welcomed, but now they say it is the African Union's turn to step forward and lead mediation and stabilization in the DRC. They then turn to another subject, reparations and historical justice. They explain that the theme of the previous year focused on reparations for Africans and people of African descent connected to the eras of slavery and colonization. The African Union, they emphasize, has always regarded slavery and colonization as crimes against humanity. A declaration supporting this position presented by Algeria has now been endorsed. According to them, this demonstrates commitment to confronting all forms of colonial legacy and continues the long struggle for independence that began in the mid-20th century and still continues today. They indicate that the issue of reparations will remain a central objective of the Union. The discussion then shifts to the Sahel countries. They describe the situation in the Sahel as extremely complex. Terrorist groups operate across borders, committing crimes that affect the entire region. Because of this, they argue, solidarity among states is necessary, so the threat can be fought collectively. The African Union says it aims to assist in restoring peace. At the same time, they point out that some states in the region have institutions not internationally recognized, and the Union opposes unconstitutional changes of government. Therefore, engagement with those leaders is intended to help restore constitutional order while stabilizing their countries. They insist terrorists cannot be negotiated with because their actions are criminal rather than ideological. Instead, citizens of the region must unite against a shared threat, with leaders coordinating efforts to mobilize populations. For that reason, the AU says it has maintained communication with the Sahel governments to find a collective solution. They further explain that reintegration of the Sahel countries remains under consideration. The region faces proliferation of armed groups, traffickers, and secessionist rebellions that affect neighboring states as well. Because of this, engagement must continue. After taking office, they appointed a special envoy who has already met leaders of those countries, and they requested visits to their capitals to begin direct dialogue. Again, they emphasize the Sahel states need the support of the entire African Union. They also mention a wider regional initiative. Roughly 18 neighboring countries are considering a common platform to address security challenges collectively, so the responsibility does not fall only on the 3 Sahel nations. They expect this initiative to become significant in the coming months. The next question concerns the African Continental Free Trade Area. The issue raised is whether Sahel conflict threatens trade integration and why the Union appears more active in economic initiatives than in stopping conflicts. In response, they argue the Union is not inactive. Numerous mechanisms are being used to promote peace and stability, including meetings involving regional leaders. They acknowledge insecurity along borders is a major non-tariff barrier. Without security, goods cannot move between countries. Unconstitutional changes of government also increase tension and can destabilize neighboring states. They refer to the Silencing the Guns agenda under Agenda 2063 as a flagship program and say resources and efforts are being mobilized to make a difference. They add that operationalization is still at an early stage, so challenges are expected. Trade requires stability inside and between countries, and the Union remains optimistic while developing strategies for peace. They then address Ghana's plan to present a UN resolution declaring slavery the greatest crime against humanity and seeking reparations. They say Ghana acts with the mandate and support of AU member states and African representatives at the UN, and the Commission fully backs the effort. Finally, they respond to a question about environmental initiatives. They congratulate Ethiopia's environmental programs and climate efforts, stating that outcomes from the African Climate Summit will guide Africa's collective position on climate justice, adaptation financing, and energy transition while preparing to host major international gatherings on the continent. What follows is presented not merely as a policy change, but as a moment exposing deeper contradictions within the African Union itself. The Union's sudden push to reintegrate Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger is described as revealing a striking inconsistency. Burkina Faso remains suspended, yet long-serving governments elsewhere continue to participate in AU meetings without interruption. Mali faces isolation, while other leaders who have ruled for decades encounter no comparable consequences. Niger is excluded, while some of the world's longest-tenured rulers retain full membership and recognition. From this perspective, critics argue the situation highlights a double standard. They claim some governments accused of corruption, manipulated elections, constitutional extensions, and suppression of dissent remain accepted within the organization. At the same time, the Sahel authorities, Traoré, Goïta, and Chiani, expelled foreign troops, renegotiated resource arrangements, intensified security campaigns, and launched development projects such as infrastructure and food programs. Supporters interpret this contrast as evidence that choosing an independent political path rather than the specific form of governance itself triggered suspension. According to that view, the issue was not only constitutional procedure, but also control over direction. The urgency to bring them back, they argue, reflects concern about losing influence. These countries demonstrated they could operate outside the Union's framework, managing security, resources, and policy without its approval. To critics, that challenges the AU's relevance. To defenders of the AU, reintegration is necessary to preserve cooperation and prevent fragmentation across the continent. Either way, the moment has sparked a wider debate. The criticism did more than question a decision. It questioned the purpose of the institution. Is the African Union primarily a diplomatic platform maintaining stability, or should it actively reshape political realities? As the Union seeks dialogue and renewed engagement, the larger issue remains unresolved. The question now is not simply whether suspensions will eventually be lifted. The deeper question is what kind of African Union will exist afterward, one maintaining the existing order or one transformed by pressures emerging from the Sahel. That answer will determine whether this episode becomes a temporary disagreement or a turning point in Africa's political trajectory.